It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Kempton, a pediatric sleep expert. Dr. Kempton entered as a lower school parent, and we quickly connected over the understanding that sleep is a critical part of our children's health, adults too. This talk, titled Healthy Sleep for Kids, is essential for happy, healthy children, so please enjoy.
Thank you, Julie Brooks, for organizing this. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics. I have 3 kids. A 5th grader here at Latin, a 3rd grader who's not yet at Latin, and then a SKer. And they have taught me a lot about many things, but especially about sleep. And I trained as a physician, but I've worked for the last 4 or 5 years in the wonderful area of pediatric sleep. So I help families all over the world establish healthy sleep patterns. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the basics about sleep. So usually we know, most of us know, why our kids should be eating healthy fruits and vegetables and why exercise is so important, but not as many are as familiar with why we need sleep, so much sleep. The 4 to 5-year-old set really needs closer to 11 to 12 hours. So our 6-year-old really works on closer to 12 hours of sleep. There's definitely a range for even our 5th grader, who is 11 now. He does at least 11 hours of sleep at night. So it's a lot of sleep, and probably a little eye-opening to all of you. I thought we'd talk a little bit about what happens during sleep to your brain. When I was thinking about it, I thought about someone that maybe many of us have read about, or maybe read her books or watched her show. And really, when I thought about it, it really is true. What happens during sleep, and there's a lot of sort of obviously studies about it, but it's sort of like this hyper-organizing that happens. And it's really when the day's learning is cemented. It's when memories are filed and kind of organized in a very Marie Kondo type way, where all the blue shirts are together and the silk blue shirts are together and then wool blue shirts are together. And not only that, but those connections are sort of knit together. So it's sort of this idea of cementing the learning and then enhancing them by making those connections stronger. And that's what basically makes us smarter. It makes us remember things. So it's when memories are filed and stored and these learning connections are made. And also importantly, just as a side note, but it's also important, it's when the only time for our kids when growth hormone is released. So there are some studies that show that kids that don't get enough sleep long term also have problems with growth. But basically what happens during sleep is sort of this hyper-organizing. And if you think of your house after a few days of kids being around and no one cleaning up after themselves, you sort of have this pile of stuff, and the laundry piles are mounting. And if no one does the cleanup, then sort of life becomes a little bit hard to live. It's a little bit unlivable. And that's what happens if you don't get enough sleep. You kind of have this jumble of your brain. So that's the best illusion I could think of, and thanks to Timothy for helping me. So the consequences of not getting that sleep, that 10, 11, 12 hours for our kids, what the studies show, or they sort of allude to these concepts of not getting enough sleep is akin to being legally drunk. So think about that for us, but then how that would affect a kid who's not getting enough sleep. So not being able to think clearly, not being able to make wise choices, not being able to, let alone solve problems or be creative. So the idea of your head kind of spinning and sitting in a classroom and trying to learn, this is what's happening to our kids that aren't getting enough sleep. So this was very telling, and I think maybe will hit even harder home. One study showed a 2-grade learning difference between a kid who got enough sleep and didn't get enough sleep. So a 4th grader performs like a 2nd grader with as little as 1 hour less of sleep. And I'm not talking one night of going out late. We're talking over time. So a sleep debt over time, and even some studies were showing even 15 minutes less a night of sleep than what your child actually needs, accumulated over time, over months, we're talking, not one night, can result in this kind of learning difference, the ability to retain information, sit in the classroom, make wise choices, socially be able to interact, listen to the teacher, things like that. So that's just 1 hour less of sleep over time. The top reasons for not being able to fall asleep easily at bedtime. The biggest reasons are an ill-timed bedtime. So if bedtime is too early or too late, based on your kid's overall schedule. In my experience with working with lots and lots of families, the usual culprit is the bedtime is too late. So when you put a kid down overtired and you miss their window, it's kind of like the idea of giving them a 6-pack of Red Bull and then saying, okay, time to settle, good night. And their body produces a hormone called cortisol, which is the one that makes you kind of run. And so it's very difficult to settle when you miss the window of sleep. You put a kid down overtired and their body is running because we've missed that window, and it makes it really hard to then settle, and it usually takes an hour or two for that Red Bull, so to speak, to wear off. Another big cause these days is screen use too close to bedtime. So there's a lot of studies about this now, but the latest one out of Harvard is that to limit screen use, to turn off all screens within 2 hours of bedtime. So that means phones, computers, TVs, obviously, but the 2-hour window. And the reason is the blue light from screens like this is the light wave that inhibits melatonin production. So the melatonin is what they call our internal sleep hormone, which helps all of us fall asleep easily. When it's shut down, it's the thing that we need to fall asleep. And the two things that have to happen for us to easily fall asleep are a rise of that melatonin and a drop of the core body temperature. If the melatonin isn't able to rise, and if it's blocked by the screen, then it makes it very difficult. So if kids are watching TV, even a little bit of TV, even just 5 minutes, it can really cause that latency to sleep that you see, that I see often. Diet is another one. Two things about that. One is have dinner also a couple hours before bedtime. Usually I recommend dinner about 2 hours before bedtime, and then limit snacks, because the snacks are the ones that are usually the sugary things, even fruit. But a lot of times people are just giving bars out at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, or other sugary things that can also, and processed foods especially, there's a lot of research about this, that can also make it very difficult for their bodies to settle. So really try to have a healthy dinner, focus on healthy eating, and exercise, obviously, to help that with that wind down. And then the last one I already mentioned, but if it's too light or too cold. So the idea is that the drop in the core body temperature is controlled by the temperature. What we're aiming for usually for a room temperature is 68 to 70 degrees. So pretty cool. The drop in the core body temperature and the rise in melatonin in conjunction are what help us fall into sleep. So really that, at this time of year, darkness is not an issue. I have a lot of issues with darkness with kids in the summertime, because at 8 o'clock it's still light and our kids are like, why are we going to bed? It's still light out. So you really have to manufacture that darkness. So when I'm sleuthing out, why is it taking them so long to fall asleep? I think about the bedtime. If a parent tells me they have to wake them in the morning, usually it's slipping that bedtime earlier that makes a big difference. And this asking about screen use, the diet, exercise, and making sure the room is dark. But usually the bedtime. There's also something called this forbidden zone, which is really an interesting area of research. I don't want to get too scientific, but this forbidden zone, the idea with sleep, one of the scientific ideas with sleep is we have what's called an internal circadian clock, and it's sort of our internal biological clock. And basically, I like to just describe it as what you want to do with our sleep times as adults and with kids is catch their sleep wave. And there's these certain sleep waves that happen during the day. For little kids, there's sleep waves that happen where they take their naps. For adults, we even have a sleep wave. And if you get tired at about 4-ish in the afternoon, that's when we have a little dip, and that's when actually the experts are recommending that we take a little 20-minute nap at that time. So some of these big companies like Google have these Google nap pods where you can take a little rest in the afternoon. So we do have these natural dips. And then for kids, for bedtime, that natural sleep wave is again between 6:30 and 8. And you want to figure out what is your kid's ideal bedtime, where they fall asleep easily within about 15 to 20 minutes, and then they get that 10, 11 hours at night. And then you want to figure out, another thing you want to kind of figure out, what is your kid's ideal? Like I said, one of my kids is definitely 11 to 12, one is more like 10 and a half, and I know that, so we stagger the bedtimes, or we figure out what's the wake time, and then we back it out. And if we miss those windows, we pay big time, because that little bit of less sleep results in some behavioral stuff. So figuring out that bedtime to make sure that falling asleep, usually we're anticipating it takes, on average, a kid about 15 minutes to settle. So they should take not much more than that, 15 to 20 minutes to get themselves to sleep on their own. When we get to that number, then we know that that's sort of the ideal time for them, and they're sleeping all the way through the night. So my third takeaway is to set up for sleep success. So doing all the things that we just talked about, making sure that we have ample exercise, and Latin's great about having recess and obviously our gym time every day. Healthy diet, making sure the timing is right. So again, aiming for that 6:30 to 8 window for our kids. Now, if there's any JK parents in the house, generally that bedtime is skewed earlier because we're aiming for that 11 to 12 hours of sleep as opposed to the 10 to 12. So the 11 to 12 hours of sleep, if they're waking between 6 and 7 and your kid needs 12, it has to be a 6:30 bedtime, even 6. I mean, don't be afraid of early. And the other concept with the early bedtimes is early bedtimes always translated to longer sleep periods at night, whereas later bedtimes, like sometimes our kids on the weekend, like, can we stay up late? Can we stay up late? Can we just do this? Can we stay up late? And I always tell them, I would love for you to be able to stay up later, but you can't do it until you sleep in. You're not sleeping in. So we don't have the teenagers yet. Someday we'll have that problem, and we'll have this talk in the upper school. But right now we have the issue is if we put them to bed later, they're still going to wake at 6 to 7. So now we're allowing them to stay up till 9, and we're chopping off an hour. And then again, we pay the next day. So time that bedtime right. Eliminate screens. I know this is obvious, but I always have to say, a lot of families that I work with, they'll say, well, we read books on the iPad or whatever, or we do a little video, we always do this educational video as part of our bedtime routine. And we always insert the word educational because that makes it seems like it's totally palatable to do it that way. But really within 2 hours of bedtime, because that can be the thing. And then, eating, I already talked about. And then just setting up that room so that it's conducive to sleep. The darkness, and now, like I said, this time of year is not a problem, but what we usually say is cave-like. So not even being able to see your hand. Now, if some kids ask for a night light, that's totally fine. You just don't want the night light to turn into the hallway light, to turn into the closet light, because I have a lot of kids that have this pattern of, I need a light, and then I need another light, and then I need another light. And again, that's an excuse to get back in the room, but really then you create an environment that's not conducive to sleep, and it's hard for them to stay asleep when all the lights are on. You think you're solving a problem, but it usually creates a problem of night wakings or early wakings when all those lights are on. It makes it very difficult to fall asleep. And then just be really consistent about your routines. Have a really consistent routine. It doesn't matter who's doing it. Obviously, we want babysitters to be able to do it, parents to be able to do it. But a routine, routines are very comforting for kids, first of all. And it helps to establish the idea that after this routine, we have sleep. After this, every night we're going to do this routine and we have sleep. And kids can be very anal about their routines, and that's fine. I think my kid's really OCD because he's so anal. Our kids are really anal about their routines too, because that's what they need to happen, are these 3 things for them to then feel calm and relaxed and then go to bed. And it's okay to give in to those things. But what the problem that a lot of us run into, and I always lump myself in it, is that there's then requests. After all of we have a whole rigmarole with some of our routines. We do the books, and then there's kisses, and then there's tickles, and there's an upside down hold, and there's a hug, and there's a dance. And I'm like, now I'm done. I'm out of the room. And then one more thing. So we all have our things, and I'm willing to kind of give in to this. And then when we reach, this was our last part of our routine, and then there's one more request, that's when we all have to learn to set the limit. Because if we don't set limits, then there's no end, and then the kids don't know what are their boundaries. limit setting helps them feel comfortable and safe and to understand what the boundaries are. But if we keep giving in to one more thing, then it's hard to then extract yourself from the room. And then all of a sudden your let's just say 7 o'clock bedtime becomes 8 o'clock because you've spent the last hour responding to requests for more this, more that, because you think you're saving them. You think you're rescuing, you're providing another tissue, another glass of water. And all those things are okay, by the way. If they want water, like our daughter likes to have her little bottle of water next to her bed. I had one recently where she was obsessed with tissues, and I always said, fine, give her put the tissue box right next to her bed, but you don't have to go in and give a tissue. She can get the tissue by herself. She can drink the water by herself. So if there's little things that seem a little nutty, our kids can be a little nutty, give it to them. I mean, you're not going to give them a chocolate chip cookie in bed, but little things that seem late and crazy. Like I have one client where basically there's barely enough room for the kid in the bed because he wants all these stuffed animals. It's okay. If that makes him feel safe, let him have them. Don't say you can only have one stuffed animal. Well, do you want to have a give and take around sleep? So if there's certain things that your kids are asking for, you want to allow that, but then set the limits around the other things. So have that give and take so that they feel comfortable and safe and reassured and know that you're going to be there and you're going to be right next door, but it's sleep time. That's what will help with the bedtime. My main takeaways, which is to make sleep a priority, to not be the pillow, so don't be a crutch for your kids. Step out of the room, have confidence in them, and kind of set up for sleep success. So make sure the routines are in place, that the environment is perfect, that the timing is perfect, that you've removed the screens, and allow that, and allow them to get the sleep that they need. And also remember that you're not alone, because sleep issues are universal. I have clients in Nairobi, Hong Kong, India, all over the world, and everybody has these common sleep issues. So always rest assured that if you feel like you're alone, you are not. I can tell you stories and stories for hours. I could talk for hours and hours about these issues. And the great news is, about what I do, is that it's always fixable. Any sleep issue, any behavioral sleep issue, all behavioral sleep issues are very easily fixable. So if you say, I've been working with this, I've had this problem for years, she won't let me leave the room, it's always fixable. It doesn't mean it's without some consternation or a little bit of maybe a meltdown, but it's always fixable in a very short period of time. So if anyone has any sleep issues with their kids and they feel like they're stuck, know that there's a solution for it. And obviously, I'm more than happy to help. I want you guys to ask questions, but if you have something that you don't feel like talking about now, you can email me, rhk@babysleeppro.com. So that's my talk. Hopefully that was helpful. I would love to entertain some questions if anyone has any, and thank you for coming.